דפנה?
כן. שלום לכולם, שמי דפנה שטרנפלד, אני מנהלת את המכללה לייצוא ושיווק בינלאומי של מכון הייצוא, ואני שמחה מאוד שהצטרפתם אלינו למפגש היום. זה מפגש נוסף שאנחנו עושים בשיתוף פעולה עם מינהל סחר חוץ, והמטרה הפעם לספר לכם על רגולציה חדשה וחשובה של האיחוד האירופי, שתעזור לכם בפעילות שלכם, שרלוונטית לפעילות שלכם באירופה, בפרט לחברות שעובדות בייצוא מקוון. המכללה מקיימת במהלך השנה, ובפרט בתקופה האחרונה, עשרות אירועים, וובינרים, סדנאות וקורסים שרלוונטי לכל תחומי הפעילות שלכם כיצואנים. אתם מוזמנים להיכנס לאתר של המכון ולהתעדכן. כמו כן, כל הוובינרים שאנחנו מארגנים מוקלטים, מועלים לאתר, ואתם יכולים לצפות בהם בזמנכם החופשי. מעבר לכך, המכון מארגן באמצעות מנהלי ענפים, פעילות ענפית שמייצרת הזדמנויות עסקיות לכל מי שחפץ בכך בענפים הרלוונטיים. אתם מוזמנים לפנות למנהלי ענפים, וכמובן להיעזר בשירותי המידע ובשאר השירותים השוטפים שאנחנו מעמידים לרשותכם באופן קבוע. אנחנו שמחים לארח כאן את דניאל קולבר, מנהל מחלקת הסכמים בילטרליים במינהל סחר חוץ במשרד הכלכלה, ואת תומאס דה מיסטר, שהוא EU Trade Policy Advisor at the Trade and Industrial Affairs Department in the mission of Israel to the European Union. So good day to you, Thomas, and I will pass the microphone to Daniel, who will start the webinar. אני מאחלת לכם אירוע מוצלח ומעניין ויום טוב. תודה.
שלום לכולם, תודה לדפנה, ותודה למכון על היוזמה ושיתוף הפעולה, כמו תמיד. שמי דניאל, אני מנהל תחום הסכמים בילטרליים במינהל סחר חוץ, משרד הכלכלה והתעשייה. מאוד שמחים שהצטרפתם אלינו היום. אני אגיד ממש בקצרה כמה מילים על מינהל סחר חוץ, למי שלא מכיר או פחות מכיר, ואחר כך ניגש ישר לעניין, להרצאה של תומאס. אז מינהל סחר חוץ במינהל הכלכלה במשרד הכלכלה והתעשייה פועל כדי להגדיל ולגוון את הייצוא מישראל ולמשוך השקעות זרות, ועושה זאת באמצעות 3 כלים מרכזיים. יש לנו מערך נספחים מסחריים שפרוסים בבירות הסחר בעולם, אנחנו מכוננים הסכמי סחר ומטפלים בנושא של חסמי סחר, הסכמים, ובאמצעות כלי סיוע לתעשייה. אז בנושא של הנספחים יש לנו מלמעלה מ-40 מקומות בעולם, בריסל, האיחוד האירופי, אחת מהנציגויות שפועלת כדי לקדם את הייצוא, ספציפית מתמקדת בנושא של רגולציה ובפעילות מול האיחוד האירופי ומוסדותיו. האיחוד האירופי, כמו שאנחנו יודעים, שוק מאוד חשוב, שוק הייצוא העיקרי מישראל, וכן יש לצוות שם תפקיד חשוב במעקב אחר מה שקורה שם מבחינה רגולטורית, הנגשת המידע לתעשייה, כמובן שפעילות מול הגורמים הרשמיים שם כדי לקדם את האינטרסים של ישראל. אז בלי להרחיב יותר מדי, without further ado, אני שמח להעביר את המיקרופון לתומאס. Thomas de Mister, as Daphne said, is our trade policy advisor in Brussels, and he's going to be speaking today about the market surveillance regulation. Thomas is working with us from Brussels, and together with our trade attaché and head of the department there, Neta Barel, who's currently on maternity leave. So Thomas, thank you very much in advance, and wish us all an interesting webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Daniel, unfortunately, I don't speak Hebrew, so I will be presenting in English today. As Daniel explained, I'm based in Brussels, and I've been following the new regulation for the last year, amongst many other things. The reason we wanted to hold this webinar today is because we think the new regulation might have a very big impact on Israeli exporters, but only in a limited number of cases. However, we think it's better to be safe than sorry. So my presentation is structured as follows. First, we will briefly explain the EU single market for goods, and we will place this new regulation in this particular framework of EU law. Then we will be exploring the EU's reasoning behind this legislation. Thirdly, we'll be zooming in on Article 4, which is the article that we are mostly concerned with. And then to finish, we will offer some practical guidance and a real-life example. I saw a question here whether the presentation will be shared, and yes, I can confirm that the presentation will indeed be shared. So yeah, let's get started. First, we'll discuss the EU single market for goods. So the legislation on the single market for goods aims to ensure that products placed on the EU market meet high health, safety, and environmental requirements. Products allowed to be sold in the EU can circulate without barriers to trade and with a minimum of administrative burden. We call this free circulation. It's important to make the distinction between free movement in harmonized and non-harmonized sectors, as we'll see later. Harmonized sectors fall within common EU rules, while non-harmonized sectors, national rules might apply. So the goods package includes two regulations. Just a quick reminder, regulation is directly applicable across all EU member states, as opposed to a directive which needs to be transposed into national law by the EU member states. We're talking about two regulations here. First of all, there's the regulation on the mutual recognition of goods lawfully marketed in another member state. We will call this the mutual recognition regulation. And then there's the regulation on market surveillance and compliance of products. This is the market surveillance regulation. These are both part of a legislative package which the European Commission proposed. We're mostly interested with the second one, the market surveillance regulation. The other one, the mutual recognition regulation, is where the distinction between harmonized and non-harmonized sector comes in. For non-harmonized sectors, products, as we saw, may fall under national rules, which could be different in the different EU member states. However, they should still be able to circulate freely. And according to the principle of mutual recognition, a product may be marketed in an EU member state if it has been lawfully marketed in another EU member state. Exemptions are only possible in order to protect public interest, and the new regulation, the mutual recognition regulation, tries to strengthen this framework of mutual recognition. But we're moving on to the market surveillance regulation. So what was the EU's objective when they drafted this regulation? In short, they want to ensure a level playing field and protect consumers. There's a growing number of illegal and non-compliant products on the EU single market. They think it distorts competition among businesses and may put consumers at risk. For example, there's a growing number of unsafe chargers on the EU market. Mostly they're coming from Chinese web shops. And in case anything goes wrong, for example, a charger explodes or catches fire, the European market surveillance authorities have experienced some difficulties in reaching out to the Chinese manufacturer and communicating with them, because often they don't speak English, only Chinese. And there's no way for the European market surveillance authorities to enforce legal recourse. Some malicious Chinese exporters even try to trick consumers. This has been in the news recently. For example, the CE marking. So some of the Chinese exporters are affixing a CE label, which very closely resembles the European conformity label, but it means something totally different. It stands for China export, and it doesn't say anything about the quality or safety of the products concerned. Chinese exporters can put the label on their product without any testing whatsoever, but it closely resembles the CE marking, so it could be misleading for some consumers. So this legislative package, the goods package, aims to reinforce trust in the single market by doing several things: improving and facilitating mutual recognition for goods, which is where the mutual recognition regulation comes in, which we first discussed. Furthermore, it intends to ensure compliance with and enforcement of product legislation. This is where the market surveillance regulation comes in, which we're mostly concerned with and which we'll be discussing now. So market surveillance intends to protect EU consumers, and there's several market surveillance authority in each country. So it's the competence of the EU country to enforce compliance with product legislation. They cooperate closely with customs, of course, because goods are coming into the EU through customs, and they control the products, and they're able to take measures in case products are non-compliant, such as product withdrawals, recalls, and even sanctions. So this new market surveillance regulation will replace certain provisions of an older regulation, and it will improve them in particular by preventing non-compliance, by providing information to and joint activities with businesses, as well as improved cooperation between the EU countries themselves, between market surveillance and customs authorities, and through an EU product compliance network. Lastly, it will be providing more effective enforcement tools to address online sales. This is the part we're mostly interested in. So remember the example of dangerous chargers. The new regulation will have the greatest impact on online sales. The EU wants a contact point based in the EU that they're able to easily communicate with. Currently, consumers have been considered the importers of the products they buy online from non-EU companies, meaning that they are legally responsible for ensuring that these products comply with EU safety standards. In reality, most end users are unaware of this, and it's quite unreasonable to expect consumers to take legal responsibility for compliance for the products they buy online. So the new regulation tries to close this loophole by requiring an official representative in the EU for all products sold on the EU single market, either directly or online. And if there's no representative in the EU, a fulfillment service provider will be responsible. So let's have a look at the timeline. The goods package proposal was first published by the European Commission in December 2017. In July 2019, the market surveillance regulation entered into force, which means it was published in the official journal of the European Union. On February 2020, a couple of months ago, they published the draft guidelines on Article 4, the article we will be zooming in on later, and they held a stakeholder meeting. During the stakeholder meeting, I was present there. We discussed the draft guidance document, and several topics were discussed. For example, we would like the document to contain an exemption for products, for trade shows and samples. Theoretically, at the moment, you would need an EU-based responsible person before even selling to the EU, just to send your samples to an importer. Of course, this is something we wouldn't like to see. So we try to push for the European Commission to include this in the guidelines as well. Furthermore, there were some discussions about the exact wording of the guidance. They are using a few confusing terms interchangeably, like responsible person and economic operator. This might be confusing for exporters when they are looking at the guidelines. We would also like them to include more examples of cases. And then finally, quite an important topic was whether on the labeling of the product and the packaging, an email address should be included as well. This might, of course, entail the risk of receiving a lot of spam email. Even though the regulation entered into force in July 2019, it will only be applicable as of July 16. The regulation will apply except for the setting up of the Union Product Compliance Network, which is less relevant to us at the moment. So let's zoom in on Article 4, the article that we are going to look at in depth today. It specifies that for certain product categories, there should be an economic operator, which means the same here as a responsible person. Like I said, confusing wording sometimes, in the EU that can provide information to and cooperate with the market surveillance authorities. Again, here you can see the EU wants a contact point established in the EU. If there is no economic operator in the EU established after 16th of July 2021, and your products fall within the categories we will mention later on, your goods will not be allowed to enter the EU. So this might have a very, very big impact, and it's important to prepare in advance. When is such an EU responsible person required? If the product falls into the scope of one of the regulations that are listed in the legal article, we will see this in detail later on. And if your product is placed on the EU market. So how do they assess whether a product is placed on the EU market? If it's offered for sale online, it's presumed to be made available on the EU market if the economic operator directs its activities to a member state by any means. In order to assess this, they could take several factors into account, such as the geographical areas to which dispatch is possible, the languages available, or the means of payment and currency. If the goods are already being sold in the EU, of course, the goods have been placed on the market. So, which goods are covered by Article 4 exactly? The new regulation covers the market surveillance of industrial products. So this means already that food products are excluded, and it applies to all the products listed in the Annex 1 of the regulation. But the article we're concerned with only covers a limited subset of these regulations, mostly products with higher risk. These are also products that require CE marking. Just a quick reminder about CE marking. This marking is required for many products. It shows that the manufacturer has checked that these products meet the EU safety, health, and environmental requirements. And it's an indicator of the product's compliance with EU legislation. And as such, it allows free movement of products within the European market. So for the products we will be looking at, CE marking is practically always required. The new rules shall not replace the market surveillance aspect specifically regulated in relevant product legislation. So if there's already more specific legislation in one of the other legislations that we're referring to, the more specific legislation applies. This is called the principle of lex specialis. And this is the case for cosmetics regulations, medical devices, and in vitro diagnostics. Referring to medical devices, for example, an authorized representative is required in any case, always. So it's more strict than the regulation we're looking at now. and I see that there was also a question on this topic. So no, it's not applicable for cosmetic products. So which goods are covered by Article 4? I made a whole list here. It ranges from construction products to radio equipment to safety of toys, machinery. So quite a lot of goods are covered by the article. I've tried to include the HS codes here as well, but for some products, there's so many HS codes that are applicable, so I didn't include all of them. But as you can see on the next slide, these are all hyperlinks. So when you are trying to assess whether your business will be impacted by these new regulations, you can just click on the directive and then check the scope and see whether your product is covered. So now that we've established when such a responsible person is required, who can actually be a responsible person? So the economic operator must be, oh, sorry, I just skipped one thing. What are the tasks of such a responsible person? Sorry. An economic operator or responsible person must be established in the EU, very important, in order to, first of all, ensure the availability of the conformity documentation, which is required under CE marking, cooperate with market surveillance authorities in case there's a request for a certain product being non-compliant, and inform authorities when they have reasons to believe that a product presents a certain risk. So who can be this EU responsible person? A manufacturer based in the EU automatically becomes a responsible person through their establishment in the EU. So any subsidiaries that your companies might have in the EU could also act as a contact point for the authorities, and as such, you should not undertake any specific action. Secondly, an importer in the EU. So if your product from outside the EU is sold in a physical store in the EU, it means that the product has already been placed on the EU market by the importer. If you're selling online with a conventional supply chain with an importer and distributor, you're still making use of an importer. The importer will be the responsible person. However, it is also possible that the manufacturer appoints additionally an authorized representative in the EU, in which case the authorized representative will take over the tasks we described in one of the previous slides. So working with an importer, there's no additional action required from your side. You're already safe. Then we've reached the authorized representative in the EU, which you as a manufacturer will need to appoint yourself through a written mandate. So if your product is being shipped from outside the EU directly to the end user, so you're not using any intermediaries, you're doing the shipping yourself, you're based in Israel, you have no presence in the EU at all, then you will need to appoint an authorized representative, which will be the responsible person. If you have not appointed an authorized representative, the product cannot be offered for sale to end users. Very important. Finally, we have the fulfillment service providers, and they will be the responsible person if there's none of the other three types of responsible persons we talked about previously, just by handling the product. This is newly introduced by the new regulation. So what is a fulfillment service provider? It's a person or company offering at least two of the following services: warehousing, packaging, addressing, and dispatching, without having ownership of the products involved. So postal companies are specifically excluded. Some examples: Shipwire, fulfillment by Amazon. I know that fulfillment by Amazon is very popular here in the EU, mostly from American exporters that have all their products in European warehouses, and Amazon Fulfillment Services takes care of the warehousing, the dispatching, the addressing, the packaging. So in this case, you would be your fulfillment service provider, if you don't have an authorized representative, would be the responsible person. If the fulfillment service provider handles the product, he's the responsible person unless an EU authorized representative has been appointed, as we stated already. So what do you need to do if you're working with a fulfillment service provider in the EU? You will need to assess your relationship. There is not an automatic connection between the manufacturer with the manufacturer in order to fulfill the tasks of the responsible person. So before accepting to provide the fulfillment service, the provider would need to receive from you as a manufacturer the means to fulfill its obligations, which means you will have to give your declaration of conformity or performance for the products concerned to the fulfillment service provider, and assurances, he will need assurances that you will cooperate to ensure that his tasks can be fulfilled, such as providing technical documentation or undertaking corrective action when requested by the authorities. And just having a look at the questions here. One moment. So I saw a question here. It is not relevant. Indeed, it is not relevant to medical devices, IVD devices. No, not at all. Does watches and jewelry also applicable? I would have to look at the exact legislation. I would recommend you to do the same, the slide with the hyperlinks, you can check there. But for example, digital watches, which contain electronics, would almost certainly fall under the low voltage directive and would thus need a representative in the EU. Can you show the chart for the goods involved in these new regulations again? I will do that later on at the end of the presentation. Is this relevant from now or from June 2021 and beyond? It starts applying from June 2021. So you will already need to take your precautions, need to take some measures, and to be sure that your products will still be allowed to enter the European market. Let's move on. Okay, we are organizing a little poll now, some interactivity. How are you selling to EU customers? Either one, through an importer and value chain of distributors, possibly. Two, through a fulfillment service provider. Three, direct online sales. Or four, a combination of the above.
ההצבעה פתוחה, בבקשה תצביעו. ניתן ככה איזה חצי דקה להצבעה.
אם מישהו מעדיף לשאול שאלות בעברית, הם יכולים להקליט גם בעברית ונדאג לתרגם את השאלות.
I'll just give you a couple more, a little bit more time to answer the poll.
Okay, I think we can look at the results.
Okay. Is everybody seeing the results or?
Yes, everybody see it on the screen.
Okay. So 55% through an importer and distributors. That's good. You probably won't be affected by this new regulation. 3% through a fulfillment service provider. That's not that much actually. One of my colleagues already told me that this type of service is less popular in Israel. 6% direct online sales. You will definitely be affected if your goods fall within one of those categories. And then a combination of the above, 35%. If you have a combination of the above, it means that for all of the products for which you don't have an importer or an authorized representative, you would need to appoint an authorized representative. So if there's a combination of the above, you will still fall within the scope of the new regulation. I think we can close the poll now and continue. So how should you prepare for this new regulation? Companies who are placing these products on the EU market, if you don't identify a responsible person in the EU yet, or who rely on an economic operator established in the United Kingdom, should assess their obligations and take the necessary steps. Why do I mention the UK? Because of Brexit. If the UK and EU negotiators fail to agree and they implement the trade deal and no extension is agreed, then UK suppliers to EU end users will also need to appoint a responsible person in the EU. So you won't be able to use your importer based in the UK anymore in order to comply with the legislation. So what steps should you take? How should you assess the impact? First of all, is your product covered by any of the legislations referred to in Article 4? I would recommend you have a look at the slide with all of the hyperlinks I put up, and then check the scope of the article. We'll give a practical example later on in the presentation. Second, is your product being sold online or through other methods of distance selling? And assess your supply chain. Are you working with an importer, an authorized representative, or a fulfillment service provider? If you fall within the scope of the legislation, you would, of course, need to indicate your compliance with the new regulation by labeling your products. The name, registered trade name or trademark, and the contact details, including the postal address of the responsible person, have to be indicated on at least one of the following: the product itself, its packaging, the parcel, or an accompanying document. So let's have a look at a practical example right now. We're an Israeli exporter selling toys directly to EU customer on Etsy. So there's no intermediary. You're shipping your products from Israel directly to the EU consumer. First of all, you would have to identify the relevant legislation. Again, I'm referring to one of the previous slides with all the hyperlinks. Second, you would have to check the scope of this legislation. And third, if your product is covered, you should take measures, you should take action and be prepared. So identifying the relevant legislation, toys, which legislation can be applicable? Toy safety, of course. Possibly also the low voltage directive. As I said, almost all of the electronics fall within the scope of the low voltage directive. So if you have an electronic toy, you would be covered by at least two of these legislations. Then, like I said, you can click on the link. That's the picture that I pasted here. Comes from the link. It's a snip screen I took in order to check the scope. In practically all of the regulations, you can find it under Article 2, which almost always defines the scope. In this case, this directive shall apply to products designed or intended for use in play by children under 14 years of age. Toys. So your product is covered. You should take action and be prepared. We were talking about an online direct sale to an EU end customer. You as a manufacturer shipped the product directly to your customer based in the EU without any intermediary. So no importer, no fulfillment service providing, and you're shipping from Israel. You have to appoint an authorized representative in the EU. Some practical tips I can give you when assessing the whole legislation. If your product requires CE marking, as we saw, the chances are very high that it will be covered by the new regulation. practically all electronics are covered by the low voltage directive, and multiple legislations may be applicable to one product. Also, if you have several product lines, it could be that for several product lines, if you have different sales methods, that those products might be covered as well, and you would need to appoint, for example, you're selling one product through an importer, you're selling another product directly, then for the product you're selling directly, you would still need to appoint an authorized representative, even though your other product is being sold through an importer. And last of all, don't forget to label your products or the packaging with the information on the responsible person. This is how the EU market surveillance authorities will check whether you are compliant with the new legislation or not. So we're already at the conclusion. If you are selling directly to EU consumers without an intermediary in the EU, and your products fall within the scope of the regulation, which might be the case if your products require CE marking, you will need to appoint an authorized representative in order to continue selling to the EU, or you will need to contact your fulfillment service provider and provide him with the necessary documentation that he needs in order to be able to legally still offer your product on the European market. Other options would be to start working with an importer in the EU or to establish a subsidiary in the EU. Of course, this is more difficult to implement on short notice, but since we are already early in with the legislation, we would already be able to take some of the necessary steps. So I think it's time for another poll. We almost reached the end of the presentation, after which I will be taking questions. But for now, I'd like to hear from you whether you think, after everything you heard at the moment, whether your business will be affected by this new regulation.
ההצבעה פתוחה, בבקשה תצביעו. מעולה, אני רואה שהרבה מצביעים. יש תשובה אחת שמובילה. עכשיו תיקו. הקרב מאוד מאוד צמוד. Okay, I think we can share the results.
Okay, so good that we organized this webinar, because 44% of the participants think they might be impacted, which is quite a high number. I'm glad we did this. 36% no, all the better for you. And then there's still 19% who don't know whether they will be impacted. So what I would recommend is that after this webinar in the coming weeks, you have a look at the presentation, check the slide with all the legislations that I put into there, check whether you're covered by this new legislation or not. And if you still have difficulties finding out whether you will be impacted or not, you're always very welcome to reach out to me. One moment, how do I close the poll here? Yes. So you could also have a look at some other additional information that I have included here. So the draft guidelines, as I said, I was present at the stakeholder meeting where we discussed these. The final draft guidelines should be ready in September this year. So that's the final document they will give to exporters in order to guide them towards the content of this new regulation. I will be sure to share these guidelines as soon as they're available with all of the participants. There's also a blog post we wrote which explains some of the stuff we talked about today in more detail. And then, of course, there's the blue guide on the implementation of EU product rules. It will be updated in the near future to reflect the most recent changes and to also include this new regulation. Then I also put up some links to the regulation directly, both of them. Also, if there's any questions about the mutual recognition regulation, feel free to reach out or ask them now in the question tab. So we're near the end of my presentation. For any additional questions, you can email them to this email address here. And now we will be going through the list of questions. Maybe Daniel, I saw that there's also a Hebrew question in there. Could you help me out? Unfortunately, I'm not that fluent in Hebrew yet.
Yes, sure. If you can hear me, there's a question. What happens if I'm working with an importer or a distributor that is marketing my products under their own brand names?
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, they take over the manufacturer's responsibilities. So they would have to have all of the information on the design and the production of the product, because they will also be assuming the legal responsibility when affixing the CE mark. So they take over all of the responsibility. Any other questions?
Yep, there's another one. Could you also use a distributor as your authorized representatives in Europe?
Theoretically, this is possible, but I would not recommend it. Distributors should first and foremost focus on the sale and the marketing of your devices and not on regulatory affairs. There are several reasons for this. First of all, your distributor's name and address will be on all of your materials. So if you ever decide to change distributors, you will have to reprint all of your materials. And there's also the additional challenge that products that are already in circulation have the wrong contact details on them if you decide to change distributors. Second, if you choose one distributor among your network of several distributors, it might cause some tensions with the other distributors you're working with. And then the third, maybe even the most important one, is that as your authorized representative, your distributor will also have access to all of your technical files, which may include proprietary information. I'll have a look at the other questions here that I can still see. If I have a distributor in the EU, in the UK, can he act as my authorized representative in the EU? So we already talked about the potential dangers of using a distributor as an authorized representative. Secondly, if he's located in the UK, the way it looks now, you would not be able to use him. You would need to look for an authorized representative or an importer in the EU to assume to assume the responsibilities outlined in the new regulation. Can you help in finding a notified body that can audit medical devices according to the MDR? Seems that they are not available for Israeli company. A question by Jakub Azulay. I don't think that this question is relevant to this webinar, but you can see my email on the presentation. I would suggest that you write me an email and I will be assisting you in whichever way I can on this question. Clamps and coupling solutions for water and wastewater, do they also belong to this new regulation? I'm not sure. I would have to go into the list of covered legislations to be able to find out. But I think clamps and coupling solutions, they might fall under the pressure equipment directive. I would need to go into more detail. Also for you, you can always send me an email and I'll do as best as I can to help sort this out. Due to COVID-19, notified body can't come for audit. Any solution? Again, I would advise you to reach out. Children product, not a toy. Is it fall in the list? If specific standard, no CE required. Also from here, this is a very difficult question to assess, especially when it comes down to questions on a product level. You saw the list of regulations. It covers, I think, around 18 products. I'm not familiar with all of the product regulations. So yeah, I would advise you to reach out separately, and I will assist you in any way I can. What if the distributor is also the importer? If the distributor is also the importer, it's fine. He's an importer, so he assumes the responsibilities in the new regulation. You won't have to undertake any other action. The rules and regulations that you have exhibited now are relevant for the UK marketer as well. Well, this depends, of course. So we don't know yet what's going to happen after Brexit. Will the UK copy most of the product legislation? As of now, it's still very unsure. The whole Brexit ordeal leaves a lot of questions, but in any case, like I said previously, if you're working with an importer in the UK, you will need to take additional steps. PPE and cosmetics. PPP is covered, cosmetics is not covered because there's more specific regulation in the train of cosmetics, the same as for medical devices and IVD devices, and those more specific regulations apply. I think we have covered most of the questions. Dania, is there any other additional question, or is there something you would still like to cover?
Yeah, the question about the notified body MDR, I can see it's also in Hebrew. And I take the opportunity to say that we're planning another webinar, right? Specifically to talk about the MDR. MDR is new regulation on medical devices that was actually going to be fully implemented as of May, if I'm not mistaken, 2020. So, but the Commission has postponed it to next year. And this regulation is affecting, in fact, the availability of notified bodies. We know it's making the life more difficult to the Israeli medical device companies. So indeed, we did hold seminars on that in the past, but we're going to have another one hopefully within the upcoming month. So stay tuned. And for the person who has a question, as Thomas said, please do send us an email. Other than that, I don't see. There's a question here about software that appears.
Yeah. I don't think software is covered by this new regulation. I will need to check, but at first sight, it's not covered by this new regulation, although there are a bunch of other regulations that are applicable to software. But again, I would advise you to contact me privately so I can research the matter. But as of now, I'm quite sure that you won't be impacted by this new regulation specifically. But if there's any other questions on any other specific legislation on software, I'm always here for your questions.
Okay, so yeah, I think we had a lot of questions. I think we can sum it up, right? It's an important regulation for anyone who's affected. Should take it seriously and prepare accordingly. And of course, this webinar is recorded, right? So it will be available for future watch. We will send you the, or you will, the attendees will receive a link to the recorded version of the webinar. I also take the opportunity to invite all our companies or attendees to contact us, not only on issues related to regulation, to free trade agreements, but also so that we can help you locate identify more customers, distributors, etc. We are here for you. We have quite a good presence in the EU and in Europe in general, as I mentioned, around the world, and our teams in the European capitals will be more than happy to assist you.
Thank you very much for your attention, and as I said, I will be open for any questions. And yeah, I leave the floor back to the host of the webinar.
Okay, so I think we can wrap it up at this point. Thank you everyone again for joining us, and do feel free to check out the blog and other newsletters and other materials, and stay in touch. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.